So this is a flight into Dalat. This airfield is 3,000 feet high up into the mountains, and everything went correctly. I flew this approach myself, and most of the videos which went correct, I flew myself. That's not to say that other pilots don't fly it correctly, but I want to make the example of a specific way to fly an approach, trying to make a certain way of doing things just to make it easier. Of course, you can fly an approach many different ways, and there's usually no right or wrong way about it, as long as you follow all the procedures and the regulations in the FCOM. But what I find on the line is that a lot of people kind of randomly fly approaches at a random point, selecting flaps and start to slow down and such, which is not a problem. But for new pilots to this aircraft, it's better to have a structured way of flying the approach and do it at the same time every time, provided, of course, that's possible with the procedure. But that makes it a lot easier to really understand what's going on, and then later when you have more experience, then you can be a bit more flexible in the way you do things. So that being said, let's have a look at this approach. So at the moment we are descending, approaching flight level 170, doing 300 knots. Okay, so let's do a profile calculation. So we are at the moment at 52 miles. So 50 times 3 is flight level 150. We're doing 300 knots. So that means we have to fly 3,000 feet lower. So flight level 150 minus 3,000 makes flight level 120. Okay, but the airfield is 3,000 feet up. So we have, at the last step, we are adding 3,000 feet. So instead of flight level 120, we'll make it flight level 150 at 50 miles. So okay, we're not there not quite yet. So let me skip ahead a bit, and there is exactly 50 miles. So we should be at flight level 150. Now you can see that we are about 1,700 feet too high. Okay, so this moment you have to check a couple of things. First, the wind. Okay, we got a little bit of a headwind that will help, but we are also very light. We're only 58.1 tons. And this is usually the reason if it looks like you're high, but you're on the VDEF. That is usually the case. If you're very light, this path is much steeper, and this difference will become less and less as you get closer to the airfield. So at the moment, there's nothing to worry about, but we have to monitor it. Okay. So let's do our next profile calculation. We'll be at 40 miles. So let's skip ahead a bit. So let's see. So that's 43 miles, 42 miles. Okay, so approaching 40 miles. The display here, the FMS is flickering a bit, so I have to find a frame where it displays. Okay, right there. So 42 miles. Okay, so 40 times 3 is flight level 120. We're doing 300 knots, so we have to fly 3,000 feet lower. So we have to be at 9,000 feet, but the airfield is 3,000 feet up. So at the last step, we add 3,000 feet. So that makes flight level 120. Okay, now we're not there yet. So skip ahead a bit, and there's exactly 40 miles. And let me find a frame again where it shows. Okay, so we should be at flight level 120 here with this speed. Now, and you can see now we're actually only 500 feet too high instead of 1,700 feet too high before. And that's just purely because of the weight and a little bit because of the wind. So far it seems that we're doing well. Now, we are approaching our cleared level here. And we just calculated we are more or less on profile. Now, anytime you need to descend but you can't, then you need to reduce the speed. That's very important. The reason is because you want to force the thrusted idle. So you put the speed back below your current speed, and that forces the thrusted idle. Okay, so that's, let me just backtrack a bit. So that's exactly what I've done. So we're approaching our cleared level. And the other thing is, when should you start to slow down? This is at alt star, because that's the moment where the aircraft will raise the nose to reduce the vertical speed, and then it might put the power on depending where your speed buck is. So when it goes into alt star, that's the moment where you want to reduce your speed. Okay, so there you go. The speed is reduced. Now, how much should you reduce the speed? As much as possible. So at the moment, that will be a green dot speed, but we don't know what green dot speed is. If you look at the FMS, if you're a bit far away from the airfield, it's probably not correct. And but 220 knots is always a first good guess. Unless you're extremely heavy, this will not be much into below green node speed. So 220 knots initially, and once you can see what green node speed actually is, then you can reduce the speed even further to green node speed to force the thrust idle. Okay, so flying level here, that was a clearance from ATC. And so now we just have to wait for ATC until they clears further. Now we can't descend much further because there's another altitude restriction here at the DILIN of flight level 100. Okay, so regardless here, the ATC just gives us another descent to flight level 110. That's only 1,000 feet lower, so that not help much. But as long as thrust remains idle, it is not really that much of a problem. Okay, so there we go. Thrust idle open descent. Now we want to shove the nose down to not get too high, so that's why I increase the speed here. So that's a way to, it's a sort of a step descent. So as you level off, then you reduce the speed. Once you can descend again, you increase the speed in open descent. Of course, you don't want to add power. And then when you level off, you reduce the speed again, etc., etc. Okay, so 1,000 feet to go. We are approaching flight level 110, and as soon as it goes into alt star, and now you have to be careful because you see here the speed buck is far above your current speed because it's still speeding up, but soon it will go into alt star, and as soon as it does that, it will start to add power if the speed buck is still higher, so you have to be quick enough. So let's see. So down we go, approaching flight level 110, there's alt star, and it seems a little bit slow. Quickly reduce the speed buck, there it is, and that maintains the thrust at idle. Okay, so now again we don't know what green node speed is, so we said 220 knots. Thrust remains at idle, and we are approaching our second last cleared level from ATC, flight level 110. Soon we'll be clear to flight level not flight level, but 10,000 feet. Okay, so now here's another gotcha. So at the moment the transition level is at flight level 110, and you will see that the standard box here remains flashing, and some people, they think, oh, it's the transition, and we'll set standard. No, flight level 110 is a transition, so you maintain a flight level, means you maintain standard, and you do not set an altitude, you do not set a QNH yet. Okay, so now we're slowing down again, and we are waiting for ATC until we are clear for the approach. So there we go. So now we're clear for the approach, so we can set 10,000 feet, and now the workload will increase a bit because we have only 1,000 feet to descend, but at the same time we're just passing transition now, so now we do have to set the QNH, and of course we're still managing the speed here, so we have to be paying attention to what all the things which are going on. So we're going to open descent, and down we go. We can increase the speed now to because we don't want to end up further above profile. Speaking of which, in the meantime we can do a quick altitude calculation, approaching 30 miles. So at the moment 31 miles, so we use 30 miles for calculation. 30 times 3 is 9,000 feet. We're doing 250 knots, so we have to fly 2,000 feet lower, so we should be at 7,000 feet. But the airfield is 3,000 feet up, so we have to add 3,000 feet, so that'll make 10,000 feet. Okay, so at 30 miles we should be at 10,000 feet. Now we're not there yet. Okay, there we are. Okay, so it looks like we are 800 feet or 900 feet too high. So now, but we're still very light, and there's a slight, okay, the headwind here, that doesn't make any difference, but we are very light, so it may or may not be a problem, this 800 feet high at 30 miles. But we definitely have to keep an eye on it. Okay, now going through transition, setting the QNH here. Again, you have to be quick enough, of course, because you don't want to bust your altitude. Now, it goes into alt star, and as soon as it goes into alt star, you need to reduce your speed again. But here, can you see the workload starts to increase? Okay, we need to set this, the QNH of the ISS also. And anyway, it was quick enough. The speed bucket is set lower, so the thrust remains at idle, the most important thing. And down we go. So here's our last cleared level before DILIN. There's a bit of weather here, so that can cause an issue if you are heavy and you want to select flap 2 because of the margin between VFNX and green dot, but luckily we are very light here. Alt. Okay, so now with flying level, again, if you need to descend but you can't, you need to slow down. Okay, so next the altitude calculation we're doing, or the profile calculation, will be at 20 miles, and this is very interesting. Now, this airport in particular, there's been a lot of issues because because of the terrain and the altitude constraint, people end up high. And but once you've done that once, you should know the next time you go there that you'll be high, and then you can calculate for that accordingly. If you go to a new airfield where you've never been before, then you can still do that. You can look at the chart in a certain distance, and if you want, you can always use a secondary flight plan to figure out exactly how many miles you have, because if you're flying an arc like this, it's usually a bit hard to calculate. But you can use the FMS, add up all the legs, and you know exactly how amount of what the distance is you're flying, and then you can figure out, okay, at this waypoint, I need to be at this altitude because of the constraint, and I have so many miles to go, and then you can figure out if you are high or low, and whether or not you need some flaps to counteract for that if you're high. Okay, so I've done this before. I know that from Dillon we have 20 miles to go. It's actually 21 miles, but let's say 20 miles. So 20 times 3 is 6,000 feet. Now let's pretend we are at the green dot speed there. Okay, so 6,000 feet, so we need to fly 1,000 feet lower, should be at 5,000 feet, but the airfield is 3,000 feet up, so you have to add 3,000 feet, so that makes 5,000 plus 3,000 is 8,000 feet. But we cannot fly at 8,000 feet because of the altitude restriction, and which is because of the terrain. Okay, so if I'm at green dot speed here, that means that I am 2,000 feet too high, because I'm flying, I should be at 8,000 feet, but I'm actually at 10,000 feet, so that'll be 2,000 feet too high. At 20 miles, 2,000 feet too high, that is really definitely too much. So you don't want to do that. Okay, so let's pretend we will be at S speed, so at flap 1 at Dillon. So same calculation, 20 miles times 3. So that's 6,000 feet, and at S speed, you should fly 500 feet lower. So 6,000, so it's at 5,500 feet, and the airfield is 3,000 feet up, so is 8,800 feet, but you still can't do that because you have to be at 10,000 feet. So even at green dot speed, I'm sorry, even at S speed, you'll be still 1,500 feet too high at Dillon. Now, what else can we do? And add even more flaps. So if you would be at flap 2 speed, you could be on your 3 degree profile. This is like you're on the glide slope. But flap 2 on the glide slope, that's just fine. Okay, so let's say 20 miles times 3, 6,000 feet. No need to fly any lower than that. So so 6,000 feet plus 3,000 feet for the airfield elevation. So that's 9,000 feet. So that'll work just fine. Of course, we can't fly at 9,000 feet, but 10,000, and this will make us actually on profile. So let's continue with our flight here. Okay, we are approaching Dillon, and so we know before already we need to add some flaps there. We need to be at least at flap 2 speed. Okay, so let's now it looks like it's not exactly slowing down very quickly because of the turbulence here created by this weather. So if it's not slowing down when you're flying level, you can always use a bit of speed brake. Now, okay, so flap 1 is selected, and knowing I want to be at flap 2, not necessarily flap 2 speed, but definitely below S speed at the Dillon. Okay, I added a bit of speed brake to make it slow down quicker. This is a total valid option you can do. The only thing you have to be quick enough to select your flap, because as soon as the speed trend arrow hits the speed bucket, it will start to add power. And because of the turbulence here, it's going up and down a bit. It actually, it may or may not. Okay, so I was quick enough to. I did add a little bit of power, but okay, flap 2 is selected, speed is reduced. Still add the speed brake because I want to be maybe on the 60 knots or so at Dillon to be able to make it in. Okay. So as soon as we pass Dillon, we want to start to descend. You don't want to delay that. So make sure the next altitude is set. So that's 6,600 feet. There we go. And we are ready for the descent. So we're passing Dillon. Then, okay, go open descent thrust idle. Now, at this moment, another mistake is often made is that the speed is allowed to reduce further to F speed, but this will put the aircraft higher above the profile. As long as you are slowing down, the descent angle will be shallower. So that's not what you want. So what you need to do is increase your speed. There you go. So open descent, the speed bug is increased, and that will push the nose down because the aircraft will chase that speed, and that will maintain our aircraft on profile. Okay, so here's our 20 miles. So like I said before, Dylan is not exactly 20 miles, but it's close enough for the calculation. But our actual altitude, okay, so now we're actually 20 miles. So 20 times 3 is 9,000 feet. I'm sorry, 20 times 3 is 6,000 feet. And we are exactly we are on S speed, not S speed. We are below S speed, so we can assume that we will be okay on the glide slope. So we don't have to calculate. We don't have to fly lower for the speed. So 20 times 3 is 6,000. That's just fine like that. And because the airfield is 3,000 feet up, that makes 9,000 feet. So 20 miles we should be at 9,000 feet. Okay, well, maybe 300 feet high. That's fine. Flap 2 is a bunch of drag, so that it's a bit like a speed brake. So 300 feet high, that means nothing here. Okay, so let's continue. Next altitude calculation will be at 15 miles. So 15 times 3, just remember that's 4,500 feet without any speed modification, which we don't need in this case because we are already at flap 2. So 4,500 feet, but the airfield is 3,000 feet up, so plus 3,000 feet. So that's 7,500 feet. So at 15 miles with this speed, we should be at 7,500 feet. Okay, so let's skip ahead a bit. So 16, there is 15 miles exactly. So we are at 7,300 feet. Good, so we're on profile. Excellent. Okay. Now the glide slope here is not valid yet. If I skip back a bit, so here you can see that okay, it looks like we're quite far below the glide slope, but that is meaningless because the signal is not valid. And you can see it moves down quite quickly, and then it goes. It looks like we're above the glide slope. I see sometimes people they get confused by that, but the thing is, you just have to remember, just don't look at it. It's not relevant. Only when you're very close to the localizer becomes this signal becomes valid. Okay, there's log star, and okay, to prevent we're going too far below the glide slope, reduce the vertical speed a bit. But again, if you use the vertical speed, you have to make sure that the speed bug is lower than your current speed to force the thrusted idle. Okay. Right, so I force the aircraft on the glide slope reducing the vertical speed. Anyway, we're approaching our level here, so it doesn't really matter. You could let it go into alt star either way. Either way is fine. Okay, so next, what we have to think about is when to configure, when to put the gear down, when to put flap 3, etc. Now, you have to be very careful with this with a high airfield because it's easy to do it wrong. For example, when we do our profile calculation, at the last step we added the airfield elevation. We didn't subtract it, we added it. But that's just for the profile calculation. If you want to know when to lower the gear, for example, like if you would lower the gear at the 2,000 feet, you should not add it, but instead you should subtract the altitude where you actually are. So at the moment, if we were, let's say we're at 6,000 feet, that means that we actually 3,000 feet above the ground because the airfield is 3,000 feet up. So now we should subtract the altitude from the current altitude. Subtract the airfield elevation from our current altitude, and that is very confusing, and it's just a recipe for disaster. So you have to be very careful with that, and that's why I use a different method on the approach to figure out when to lower the gear and when to configure for final flaps. Which is as follows. You just take the distance to the threshold, and because we're doing an ILS approach, we can use the ILS DME right there. You take the distance to the threshold, and then you multiply it by 3, just like we do a profile calculation where we multiply the distance by 3. So for example, if you are 10 miles, you multiply by 3. Okay, so that means you are 3,000 feet above the ground. And the advantage of this method is that it's it's less mental math because you're used to the 3 times table. You don't have to subtract, which is usually a little bit more workload than just to multiply a number which you do every day multiple times. And also it's more intuitive because if you are you don't have to mix up. There's no chance that you mix up adding and subtracting. Okay, so let's have a look now. we're on the glide slope here on that 160 knots. It's all good, and we are approaching. Okay, so 12 miles final now. So now with our company, we have to be fully configured and stable at the final fix here. But if you can use the method of using the distance at any airport which is high up. So let's do that. So the question when to lower the gear. Okay, so normally if the speed is low like this, from midway to the bottom range, we'll lower the gear at 2,000 feet. And if the speed would be higher, like from mid-range upwards, we would lower the gear at 2,500 feet instead, especially if there's a tailwind. So what we do is every mile we're going to calculate where we are on above the ground by multiplying the distance by 3. So if I skip ahead a bit, so here's 10 miles, so 10 times 3, so 3,000 feet. That means we're 3,000 feet above the ground. Now, another advantage of this method is it doesn't matter how high the airfield is. And it might sound a bit strange, like how do you mean it doesn't matter how high the airfield is? It's very important, and every airfield has a different height if it's high up, and then you have to take that into account. Now, actually, it doesn't work like that if you multiply the distance to the threshold by 3. It's always the same. If you are at the 10 mile multiplied by 3,000 feet, and let's say the airfield is 3,000 feet up, like here, you're still 3,000 feet above the ground, above the threshold. And if you are 10 miles where the airfield is, let's say, 5,000 feet high up, okay, 10 times 3, you're 3,000 feet, you're still 3,000 feet above the ground. So the airfield elevation is not relevant if you use this method of multiplying the distance by 3, the distance to the threshold. If you do a VOR approach, of course, this distance here is not available. There's no ILS DME, but you can use the distance from the FMS here on the bottom right. And no, actually, let me rephrase that. The distance on the bottom right here on the VOR approach is often, it ends short of the threshold, about 2 miles. It depends where the minima is. But so if you use this distance here, then you have to add 2 miles. But a better way, if you go to the progress page, and then you can see, if you put in the runway threshold, and then you can see the distance exactly to the threshold, and that will be the distance you use for that calculation on a VOR approach, and not the distance on the FMS flight plan page for a VOR approach. But since we're doing an ILS approach now, we don't need that. Okay. Oh, and the other thing I should mention, if you do a VOR approach and you use the distance from the FMS or the distance to the threshold, that of course that only works if you're on the final leg. If you're still turning final or you're on an arc somewhere, that distance is meaningless. So then you do have to use the distance on the flight plan page in that case. But as soon as you are final, then you can use the progress page. Okay. Anyway, we're on the ILS. Let's continue. So what we're doing now is every mile we're gonna multiply that by 3. So 10 miles we already calculated. 10 times 3, we're at 3,000 feet above the ground. So 9 miles times 3 means 2,700 feet above the ground. So looking at the speed, okay, no need to lower the gear yet. Okay, let's continue. Skip ahead a bit. So next calculation, okay, approaching 8 miles. Okay, 8 times 3 is 2,400 feet above the ground. So in that case, if you're fast, you need to lower the gear. Okay, skip it. Okay, we'll put the gear down already here. Again, that's because we need to be fully configured by the final fix and stable with our company procedures in this particular airport. But let's pretend this is just a generic airport where you don't need to do that. Or in your company, you probably don't have to, you don't have to be stable like that at the final fix. So at the next distance here, so now we're approaching 7 miles. So 7 times 3 is 2,100 feet above the ground. Ah, okay. So this is the moment where we need to lower the gear, provided the speed is not too high. Otherwise, we had to do it earlier. Okay, so and then we're waiting for 7 miles. So we know already that it's 2,100 feet above the ground. And also, you can see that the red alt is not relevant. Many mountainous areas, the ground in front of the threshold is going up and down, and it's very hilly, and that will make the red alt completely wrong. As in, it's not the distance to the threshold, or the distance to the ground at the threshold height. And this is another issue where people, they just look at the red alt to figure out when they have to lower the gear, but that's not going to work, because here, for example, you're at exactly 7 miles. Okay, that means you're 2,100 feet above the ground. You should lower the gear. But if you just rely on the red alt, you think, oh, I'm 2,400 feet above the ground. No need to lower gear. It's going to wait another 400 feet, and now you're getting really low. So you should not do that. Okay. So let's pretend, okay, we just put the gear down and we are at flap 2 from before. And then next distance will be 6 miles, so 6 times 3. So it's 1,800 feet. Okay, so that's the moment where you need to select flap 3 and then flap full. Now, the question, when should I be stable? If you have to be, let's say, stable at 1,000 feet when you're in IMC or at night, then it's 3.3 miles. That 3.3, that'll make 1,000 feet, and that's where you should be stable. So again, you don't have to subtract, figure out what the airfield elevation is, or the threshold elevation rather, and then subtract it from the current altitude. No need for that. Just take 3.3 miles, and that's where you should be stable. Okay, so that's the end of the approach. I hope you learned something, and thank you for watching. If you like this video, please consider buying my book Practical Descent Energy Management. It contains loads of examples of how to manage a descent and approach, and it is the only book available on this subject. There is a paperback and an ebook version available. You can find a link in the description below.